Implement and manage authorization mechanisms. Welcome to this lesson on implementing and managing authorization mechanisms. Authentication verifies who a user is, but authorization determines what they can do once authenticated. Authorization mechanisms ensure that users have the appropriate access based on their roles, policies, and risk levels. Organizations must implement strict access control models to prevent unauthorized access and privilege escalation. In this lesson, we will explore different access control models, policy enforcement, and best practices for managing authorization mechanisms. Let's begin. Authorization is the process of granting or restricting access to resources based on policies, roles, and security requirements. It ensures that users can only access the data and systems they need for their jobs, nothing more, nothing less. Think of authorization like an employee ID badge at a corporate office. While authentication proves an employee works there, authorization determines which floors, rooms, and areas they can enter based on their job role. For example, a software developer may have access to development servers but not production environments, while an HR manager may access employee records but not financial systems. Use the principle of least privilege, (LP), to minimize access to only what is necessary. Apply role-based access control for efficient and secure access management. Enforce multi-layered authorization mechanisms for high-risk actions. There are different access control models, each designed for specific security needs. Choosing the right model depends on the organization's requirements and risk tolerance. First, role-based access control, RBAC. RBAC assigns permissions based on a user's job function. For example, an accountant in the finance department gets access to financial records, while an IT administrator has system configuration privileges. Second, rule-based access control. This method applies security rules to determine access, such as allowing access only during business hours or restricting logins from specific geographic locations. Third, mandatory access control MAC. MAC enforces strict policies where access is determined by security classifications. Military and government systems commonly use this model to enforce classified and top-secret access restrictions. Fourth, Discretionary Access Control DAC. In DAC, resource owners decide who can access their files and systems. This model is flexible but can lead to security risks if permissions are not managed properly. Fifth, Attribute-Based Access Control, ABAC. ABAC assigns access based on user attributes like job title, location, or device type. For example, a doctor can access patient records, but only while on a hospital-approved device. Sixth, Risk-Based Access Control. This method dynamically adjusts access based on risk levels, such as requiring additional verification if a login attempt comes from an unfamiliar location. For example, an organization using risk-based access control might allow employees to log in freely from the office but require multi-factor authentication (MF) when logging in from an unknown country. Use RBAC for structured and scalable access management. Apply ABAC for dynamic and flexible access decisions. Enforce MAC in high-security environments such as government and military systems. Authorization policies must be enforced consistently across all systems to prevent unauthorized access and privilege misuse. First, Policy Decision Point (PDP). The PDP evaluates access requests and determines whether to grant or deny access based on security policies. Second, Policy Enforcement Point (PEP). The PEP applies authorization decisions by allowing or blocking access based on the PDP's evaluation. For example, when an employee attempts to access a restricted database, the PDP checks their role, department, and access privilege while the PEP enforces the decision to grant or deny access. Use a centralized access control system to enforce consistent policies. Log and monitor authorization decisions to detect security violations. Implement automated access reviews to ensure policy compliance. Privilege escalation occurs when attackers or unauthorized users gain higher levels of access than intended. Preventing privilege escalation is critical to maintaining security. First, enforce the principle of least privilege, POLP. Users should only have access to what they need for their roles, nothing more. Second, implement just-in-time access. Instead of granting permanent high-level privileges, JIT temporarily grants access only when required. Third, monitor privileged account activities. Any unusual behavior, such as an HR employee attempting to access IT admin systems, should trigger an alert. For example, a company using JAccess might allow an IT administrator to have elevated privileges only when performing system maintenance, automatically revoking them afterward. Use POLP and JIT access to limit privilege exposure. Deploy privileged access management PAM solutions to secure administrative accounts. Monitor and audit privileged accounts for suspicious activity. Let's look at a real-world example of how organizations strengthen authorization controls. A large healthcare provider faced security challenges due to excessive access permissions granted to employees. Some staff had access to systems beyond their job roles, increasing the risk of insider threats. To address this, the provider implemented Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, for standard employee access and Attribute-Based Access Control, ACC, for specialized cases. For example, nurses could only access patient records assigned to their department, while doctors could access broader patient histories, but only within hospital-approved locations. By implementing RBAC and ABAC, the organization reduced unnecessary access by 60%, strengthened data security, and improved compliance with healthcare regulations. Use RBAC to manage standard user access efficiently. Apply ABAC for more dynamic real-time access decisions. Regularly audit access permissions to prevent overprivileged accounts. Now, let's summarize what we've learned about implementing and managing authorization mechanisms. Authorization determines what users can do after authentication. RBAC, MAC, DAC, ABAC, and risk-based access control provide structured access control methods. Policy decision points, PDP, and policy enforcement points ensure consistent access enforcement. Privilege escalation can be prevented with POLP, JIT access, and PAM solutions. Regular access audits and monitoring improve security and compliance. By implementing these best practices, organizations can prevent unauthorized access, enforce security policies, strengthen access control mechanisms. This concludes our module on implementing and managing authorization mechanisms.